The Society of Actuaries Research Institute recently released the annual installment to our risk report series, the 15th survey of emerging risks. And it's sponsored by the SOA, the Canadian Institute of Actuaries, and the Casualty Actuarial Society. In addition to highlighting a wide variety of the top emerging risks, the survey also looks at some of the top current risks and also gets thoughts on a variety of risk combinations. Max, the survey now in its 15th iteration, and you've been around for all of those. What can we learn from the current version of the survey?
Yeah, thanks, Dale. It's interesting to me how some of the categories have evolved. You know, the first year of the survey was 2008. Certainly a wonderful year as a risk manager to learn things about economic risks, and those risks were the ones that dominated in those early cycles. But since then, the economic risks have gone down pretty much every year since then. But now they've seemed to have bottomed out and started to rise up, which could be very well thought of as a leading indicator of risk managers starting to worry more about the economic risks. And I think that personally, I think that's appropriate. I think there's a lot of things to worry about right now. But while we've also seen, at the same time, economic risks were coming down, a lot of the offset was to environmental risks as climate change became more of a factor to be dealt with by risk managers and to be thought about. So that is also interesting developments. Geopolitical risks is our third of the five. And it had been stable for the most part over kind of 2-year election cycles, and then enough other risks are jumping up now that it's actually come down just a little bit. Technological risks, mainly cyber risks and disruptive technology, those have grown over time, but have now seemed to have stabilized. A lot of our thought there is that the risks are stabilizing because risk managers are finding it not so much as an emerging risk, but as a current risk that they're having to deal with on a daily basis. Certainly on the cyber risk side, that's definitely true. And then the societal risks, the fifth category, those are dominated by infectious disease and demographics, and the pandemics. As we see, back in, I think it was 2014, where we had a Ebola outbreak in Africa that made it to other places around the world. We saw a surge then, and certainly in 2020 we saw a major surge in the pandemic risk as the COVID-19 pandemic took hold.
One of the things I like about the report, Max, is it asks risk managers to think about risks in combination with each other. Maybe they're happening concurrently, or one is occurring and then another layers on top of it. I guess let me ask you: is there a specific risk combination or set of them that was of most interest to you?
Yeah, the risk combinations are really interesting in the survey, and I have my opinions, and it's interesting to see what other risk managers think, because that'll shape my opinion going forward. But the one that I look at the closest is climate change, and that's probably not surprising. The military calls it a threat multiplier, which is very appropriate. And as it interacts with other risks, we need to think about the repercussions on things like pandemics and diseases in general, as the planet warms. As we get into encroaching on animal sanctuaries for living space, there's going to be all kinds of interesting diseases that have been deposited in animals, but have not been seen by humans in the past. So those will continue to evolve and potentially get worse. I look at the number of contagion type movies being released as a leading indicator. That's kind of a fun one, and it's kind of scary to see historically, how close they've actually come on some of what we thought were really far out scenarios. I remember one with pandemics where they had vaccines being carried by armored vehicles, to get them to hospitals, and I can very easily see how that would happen at some point going forward. But the other group of risks is really kind of led by permafrost. We see, as the permafrost is already starting to melt, we're seeing up in Alaska and along the Arctic Ocean, as the permafrost melts, it decays and falls into the ocean and actually affects the villages that are that far north. But as it melts, it also potentially releases microbes. We've seen some of that with in Siberia. They've actually tested some mastodons that have thawed out of the permafrost and found some microbes that they hadn't recognized in the past, and that'll continue. Um, it also serves as a feedback loop. Permafrost, as it melts, the organic matter that's inside the permafrost will then start up the decaying process again, and that'll release carbon into the atmosphere, which is a greenhouse gas, and just amplifies the warming, so it becomes a feedback loop.
Definitely something to keep our eyes on. Max, you've been associated with this survey for the full span of it, and so you've seen trends emerge and evolve. I guess anything that surprised you in the results this year?
Well, yeah, each year, as I anxiously await the data that week of Thanksgiving. The survey is done in November, and I generally spend the Thanksgiving weekend kind of making a first pass at looking at what's interesting and what's surprising before I go back and do my deep dive. But I expected, we had the big pandemic jump in 2020 and 2021, so I expected that to mean revert to some degree, and expected climate change to offset that. I mean, climate change had dropped off for pandemic in the last couple of years, and those both occurred. But I also expected we'd seen wildfires, we'd seen storms. We had tropical storm records set over the last couple of years. I expected those types of risks, severe storms and tropical storms, to increase in this survey, and they really didn't. The one that surprised me that did increase was demographic shift as a current risk, which historically we'd seen as an emerging risk. And you've got actuaries are the primary risk managers who are taking the survey, and demographics, we're looking at an aging population combined with low fertility and immigration challenges. I mean, that's right in our wheelhouse. So it's always been kind of a top 10 risk from the emerging risk standpoint, but it really surged last year for the current risk, which to me means that it's starting to become more of an impact on today's concerns in terms of whether it's from the immigration issues, or whether it's just from what kind of products that actuaries are pricing, and how that plays out over 20, 30, 40 years. And people are recognizing that that's an important thing that we need to be more aware of. But, anytime we get new data, I look forward to the 16th survey and getting that data and kind of wondering, we've got a war now this year. We had you did a podcast recently on the Asian version of this survey, where the impacts of the Ukraine invasion by Russia, were really obvious in the results. So I think, it depends on when the survey is done, what the results tend to tell us. But it's just fascinating to try to look at it and try to figure out, just what matters and what doesn't.
Interesting stuff all the way around. Max, big thanks for stopping by to cover and discuss this latest annual installment in our Emerging Risk Survey series, the 15th survey of emerging risks.
Thanks, Dale. My pleasure.
And if you have any feedback or questions about this particular report, just contact us. Send us an email at research@soa.org. This 15th survey of emerging risk report can be found on the SOA website by clicking on SOA.org, then on the Research Institute, and look under our Risk Management tab for all the reports that are there. Thanks for joining us today to learn a little bit more about the projects from the Society of Actuaries Research Institute.